I first read The Lord of the Rings when I was 18. I loved the book, thought it would make a great film, assumed that somebody one day would make a live-action film and that I'd get to go along and see it.
I did find it was probably one of the first literary experiences that sort of really taught me the meaning of how powerful the written word is.
You know, I read the books when I was in sort of 20s, and so it always left quite a vivid memory.
I got hold of a copy from my dad when I was about 15, and he said, I'll give you about 6 months to read it. And I think I read it in about 2 months.
I've been a Tolkien fan ever since my mother first bought the book for me when I was 12 and said, I think you might like this, have a read of this.
Yeah, well, I first read The Lord of the Rings in 1961. And at that point, I was totally blown away from it. It was my first year in college, and I thought, this is something like I've never seen before.
The first copy of The Lord of the Rings that I ever owned was the paperback edition that had a still from the Ralph Bakshi film on the cover of the Black Riders galloping out of Bree was the image. I remember it really clearly. I've probably still got the book somewhere.
Virtually everyone in a significant position on the movie knew the books inside out, had been obsessed with them for years.
The first thing that Fran and I did was to take the 3 books of The Lord of the Rings and to break it down into what turned out to be a 90-page treatment.
I read that in the middle of 97 and immediately was stunned that they'd actually managed to. There was Lord of the Rings, essentially Lord of the Rings. So I became a believer.
It was our first pass at really cracking the code of The Lord of the Rings, is the way that I sort of think of it, as basically, you know, saying, well, the book is a great book, the story is a great story, the characters are great, but it's unfilmable, and it is unfilmable. If you were to just shoot the book page by page, scene by scene, it would just be a mess.
Here you've got a book that's 1,000 pages long. It encompasses a different geography, all kinds of races of beings and creatures. It's a book that took the author 15 years to write. This is a challenging book to try and put on film.
You know, I always find that literal adaptations don't work. I think you've got to find what you think is essential to the book and make your movie of that. And
in that way, you know, things started to happen, like, you know, lines that Elrond would say in the book were given to Aragorn to say in the movie. You know, a line that might appear in Lothlorien was suddenly, you know, put into the minds of Moria. But nonetheless, they're still Tolkien's language. It's still his words.
Miramax, of course, were the first people to finance Lord of the Rings. Credit has to be given to the fact that they were strong-minded enough to take on this incredible task.
We wrote the first screenplay. We immediately were going to start working on the second screenplay.
And sort of towards the end there, Miramax was starting to say, well, we really feel like we want to do it in one film.
And Peter said, there's no way I can tell this in one movie and do it any justice, so I can't do that.
And luckily, Miramax was like, hey, okay, fair enough. Well, you can go ahead and see if anybody else is interested.
We had one chance of continuing with the project. And I said, we've got to somehow convince somebody to make 2 Lord of the Rings films. We've got 4 weeks to do it.
And Peter trotted off to Hollywood, and he went to many of the studios and called upon his old friend Mark Gordeski, who was an executive at New Line. And Mark set up a meeting with Bob Shea.
Bob's impossible to read. He's a completely inscrutable sort of meeting. And you can't really tell how well you're doing. So he made this, Peter and Fran made the presentation, showed a lot of mock-ups, showed the tape, played the tape, lights came up, couldn't read the situation at all.
Bob looked at Peter and said, now, Peter, why would anybody in their right mind make 2 movies?
Which shattered them both, because they didn't quite know what he meant. He said, this is 3 films. Well, thank God for that decision.
Once New Line were on board, we had to basically take our 2 scripts that we'd written for Miramax, and we had to now reorganize these into 3 different movies. And that really involved a total restructuring, page 1 rewrite, basically. Philippa Boyens. She's one of those people that had read Lord of the Rings like once a year, every year, since she was 16 years old, and knew everything about Lord of the Rings. And so we invited Philippa on board.
The collaboration between the 3 of us came down to Fran and I working incredibly closely together, locked in the hotel rooms, locked in the office at home, getting the work done, Fran then taking it to Peter and reshaping. And often we'd come to bits where we knew there was action involved, so we'd just go, they fight. And it turns into 20 minutes of the finished film. Because you just knew Peter was going to come along and do it brilliantly.
And they go...
And the reverse, I have to say, is true. Peter did that with the kissing. He would just say, he'd just hand it over to us and say, well, that's your department.
There are probably some times when it was a bit of 2 against 1, when it was actually Philippa and Fran, going against him and Peter. And he's like the only guy with these 2 women sort of pounding away on these issues.
It tends to be me on the laptop because I'm the fastest typist. I'm sorry, guys, but I am. Fran always, she likes to write by hand, and her scripts are the ones that are covered with writing. I like to keep my scripts really clean. It's scrawled all over. So she's usually sitting on the floor surrounded by notes, surrounded by the scripts, and lots of paper. And Peter would be, when he was shooting, he'd generally be lying on the couch completely exhausted because he'd just shot right through the week, and this was his day off, and he was working on the script.
The script was literally being rewritten, I'm not exaggerating, every single day and week for the entire 15-month shoot. I would get pages faxed to me several times a week. We were constantly updating them, partially because of the interaction with the actors.
We used to go around to Pete's house, which was great. And whoever was involved in the scenes, we'd go around and kind of chat through what that scene's about. And through that, a lot of the script kind of morphed into something else,
Pete and Fran and Philippa sat us down, Billy and I primarily, and said, write down anything that you are doing that is making you laugh, and try and link it in with something in the book.
There was a lot of plot lines that we sort of fleshed out, had ideas about certain specific characteristics more than anything. The idea of Frodo kind of playing with the ring and what would happen to him.
Philippa and Fran were great. They were so enthusiastic. They were so happy to I suppose to be working on something like we all were. But I mean, there was great enthusiasm and passion in how they spoke and how they wanted to work with you. And it was never, you could ring them anytime, night or day. And if you had a problem, you could discuss anything with them.
I can remember going out to dinner one night and Philippa and I sitting at the end just dreaming, and her asking for a napkin or a matchbook from the restaurant just to write it all down on, because it was, beautiful stuff what we were coming up with.
Sometimes you would start a scene one day, and under your door at night there would come up a few rewrites through. When I say a few rewrites through, I have 2 file boxes that big, filled with rewrites. I have to tell you, some are still in the envelopes unopened, because I was sometimes so tired I thought, oh hell, never mind.
The actors who were now starting to own their characters were, firing ideas to us, which, some of them are good and some of them aren't, but you certainly gratefully accept the good ideas, and this, Fran described it as furiously laying the tracks in front of the train. As it was rumbling up behind you, there was no stopping the train, and the tracks just had to go down.
It made for a degree of sort of controlled chaos. The artistic result was terrific.
The scenes that have been hardest to translate from the book into the film are actually the exposition scenes, and by that I mean scenes that have to explain a lot of detail about the plot.
Early on in the development of the Fellowship of the Ring, Peter hit upon the idea of doing a prologue. He knew he was going to have to go through this long period of exposition, so he wanted something exciting, almost like you would do with a Bond movie.
We really do need to get people into the headspace and let them understand some of what we're talking about, so that when the story really kicks in, they've got a background on things.
Peter was very specific about what he needed. I need to set up Isildur, I need to set up Narsil, I need to set up the Battle of Dagorlad, We need to introduce Sauron. We want to introduce the immortality of the elves. And we want to track the journey of the ring to being lost. And you can't do it in more than 4 pages. And so that's what I did. I sat down and I thought about it. And that's where history became legend became myth, and some things that should not have been forgotten were lost. That's where they came from. That survived, actually. They rang me back, and they were great. They just said, "We can't believe you just did that."
There are lots of things in these films which are not in the books. And I think in most cases they're improvements. Because they are scenes that do have to be seen. And they add a lot to it. Other people are going to complain about the absence of Tom Bombadil. Sad, yes, but I mean, this could go on and on and on and on and on.
And the plot of The Lord of the Rings, in our movie, in its most simple form, is Frodo carrying the ring. Eventually has to go to Mordor and destroy the ring. So, you know, what does Old Man Willow contribute to the story of Frodo carrying the ring? What does Tom Bombadil ultimately really have to do with the ring? I know there's ring stuff in the Bombadil episode, but it's not really advancing our story and not really telling us things that we need to know.
And if you look at the edit, we don't know that they didn't go into the Old Forest. We don't know that they didn't meet Tom. Conception, we just don't mention it. It's just left untold, is what how I like to conceive it. One of the hardest characters to come to grips with initially was the character of Arwen.
She has a very small part to play in the books if you simply look at the number of pages that Arwen is in. And in order to make her a character with some weight, we have had to create more material for Arwen.
We went to the appendix and wanted to draw on the appendix and the story between Aragorn and Arwen and her choices.
There's a snippet from the Lay of Luthien, the song about Beren, the mortal man, and Luthien, the elf maiden, which was a story that is mirrored in the relationship between Aragorn, mortal man, and Arwen, immortal elf maiden.
Who is she? This woman you sing of.
'Tis the Lay of Luthien, the elf maiden who gave her love to Beren, immortal.
So we have gone into that appendix for ideas and material which we can actually incorporate into the plot of the movies.
One of the keys to adapting something of such wealth of detail to film is that everything needs to do more than one thing. We were trying to bring Merry and Pippin to life more, talking about ideas to do that, and I just said, well, Merry and Pippin should steal a firework and light it.
Done.
Supposed to stick it in the ground.
It is in the ground.
Outside.
That was your idea.
Even though I knew it wasn't in the book, I just felt that you need the energy at that point. Because this is a party. You want to see some lightness and fun at the front of this movie because it gets very dark. And you're looking for something unexpected. You're introducing 2 main characters. You're saying something about them. You're also referencing an event that actually does take place in the book, which is that Gandalf has a firework which becomes Smaug, the dragon. So, you want everything that you do to hopefully do 3 or 4 things in terms of turning that piece of prose into a filmic moment. One of the primary things it needs to do is reveal character. We tried to do this with Gandalf. Gandalf tells an awful lot of exposition in Bag End, but we also wanted it to reveal something of Gandalf's character, so that it's not just telling the audience the plot, it's also telling the audience that Gandalf may have made a mistake, that this is weighing heavily on him. A sense of foreboding starts creeping into the film.
It's some form of Elvish. I can't read it.
There are few who can. The language is that of Mordor, which I will not utter here.
You can waste a lot of time, and we did do this. We We waste a lot of time trying to bring so much of the world to life, trying to explain some of the cultures, such as dwarves. And what we discovered is if you want to explain to an audience about the culture of dwarves, you cast John Rhys-Davies as the dwarf, and he'll tell you, he'll show you, he'll bring that culture to life for you.
We could pass through the mines of Moria. My cousin Balin would give us a royal welcome.
Scenes like the Council of Elrond at Rivendell have been fiendishly difficult to turn into cinema because it is a group of people sitting around talking about the plot.
I looked at the script page and I knew that if we shot it as it was written, it'll be 30, 40 minutes long. And it's just like, couldn't do it.
I think we approached Rivendell from every different direction you could possibly do. It got to the stage where it was like, don't make me go back there. I can't go back to Rivendell, please.
It's a scene that needs to get the Fellowship together to establish the ring needs to be destroyed and to establish the danger of this ring, as well as allow for that moment when Frodo decides to take the ring.
I will take it! I will take it! I will take the ring to Mordor.
What we knew right from the word go was that the ring, as the source of evil, had to be somehow animated to almost become a character in the movie in and of itself. It ends up having personal relationships. It has a relationship with Frodo, has an intense relationship with Gollum, has a powerful relationship with Gandalf and Galadriel. This ring is evil, a presence right within the Fellowship.
They will take the ring, and you will beg for death before the end. It is not yours, save by unhappy chance. It could have been mine. It should be mine. Give it to me. Give it to me.
One of the greatest things I got out of this experience, and it wasn't being able to work on these books, which I love so dearly, it was working with Peter Jackson and Fran Walsh.
Peter and Fran's sort of relationship as sort of filmmakers is ideal, really, because Fran is so good at putting words down on paper, and Peter's so good at putting those words into vision.
Peter and Fran are a great team working together. They actually they live and breathe the project, and they managed to keep a family life together quite successfully.
Fran, who you're probably not seeing on this, is for a very specific reason, and that one of them needs to remain private. And Peter, by the very nature of what it is that he has to do, is the public face of that partnership.
My abiding images of seeing Peter early in the morning sitting in his trademark shorts with unkempt hair, poring over Tolkien. And I would do the same, and I think the other actors did too.
Everybody was respectful of Tolkien and mindful of the novel and had the novel in hand, physically. It was with us. Even at the end, the last day, you'd see copies laying around the set.
We were incredibly lucky to have that as source material, that as reference material, that kind of Bible to keep turning back to.
Ian McKellen was there, and he had the book in his hand. And he came up to me, and he was like, remember, Sam grabs Frodo's hand. The fans will be looking for that. And I was like, right. Oh, great. Thank you, Ian.
Sam has hardly left your side.
We were that worried about you, weren't we, Mr. Gandalf?
The interesting phenomena with our script writing is every draft that we wrote, it became closer and closer to what was in the book. It became nearer to Tolkien.
They tried a lot of different things, and sometimes they were thought of going in a different direction from the book, and every time they tried to do that, gradually they find, and actually Tolkien knew what he was doing with the story, and they would start going back to where he had started.
I mean, there are things that sort of happened that I don't think were even within Peter's control that ended up changing the film and making it more like the book. It's almost like it was meant to be.
And so, whilst we're changing plot things, we're changing some events, we're changing characters, we're losing characters, while we're doing all the normal stuff that you have to do to adapt a book, we did want to be as accurate as possible and to putting his thematic material into the film.